What's up, everybody? I'm Anthony DeCicci with the On the Water podcast. I got Kevin Blinkoff with me and Walt Golet, who heads up the Pelagic Fisheries Lab, which is part of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And welcome to the podcast, Walt. We first met at was it the Stellwagen Bank Charter Captains Association?
That's
meeting
right.
In the winter?
Walt did a presentation there that was fascinating. We said we got to have this guy on the podcast. Lots of stuff that all of our listeners would be interested in. Walt, can you just kick us off? I'll let you describe it exactly of what your title is and your job.
I'm an assistant professor in the School of Marine Sciences at the University of Maine in Orono. So Orono is their flagship university. I am very fortunate, though, to be able to have a location at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute in Portland, which is very fortuitous because for somebody who works in the field of highly migratories and whose work is so involved with industry participation, being right on the water is perfect. And
Right.
It's one of the main reasons that we've been as successful as we have been is because I've been able to be in Portland. And even from Portland to here is not that much of a jump. So we have access to more or less the entire New England coastline. And in fact, we work with people even down in North Carolina. So it's been a great working relationship.
A lot of collaboration in science, especially around highly migratory species like tuna. We've had Dr. Jeff Kneebone in, who's talked about the work that you guys have done together on tropical and yellowfin tunas in particular. But today I think we're going to try and focus mostly on bluefin tuna, so this is exciting.
That sounds great.
You want to kind of kick us off by telling us a little bit about how you ended up where you are in life right now? How did you end up on this career path?
Sure. So as a child, at a very young age, I was very fortunate to be exposed to fishing. My father had a lot of hats that he wore. So he grew up in a family that had a long history of commercial shad fishing. He then took the reins, got a license, fished on the Connecticut River. He had a specific stretch of the river that was, we'll call it more or less, his. We'll call it his. Not assigned, but definitely his. And then as a kid, I was getting up at 3:34 in the morning to pick the net in the morning because this was the old days when there was no mono. You'd fish with twine. Twine had a propensity to get a lot of stuff tangled in it, so my mom and I would go out. My father would sell the fish, go to sleep, and we would go out and pick the nets. And we did things like old-fashioned shad bakes that I put on with my father and mother in places. So that was a really neat exposure. Second to that, my father worked in New London, Connecticut, and Niantic, Connecticut for a long time on a charter boat. He was a crew on a charter boat. So going down to New London and Niantic, I had an opportunity to interact with the folks that he worked with, and of course, they were bringing back sharks and tunas. When he didn't have clients and had obligations to go out on the charter boat, he would do commercial swordfish harpooning. So if you remember far enough back in the archives, this is back in the 60s and the 70s, there was a fairly good aggregation of large swordfish that were concentrated in and around Montauk, and that was the assemblage that he and his friend Peter Clark and some of his other friends used to go on. So as a kid, I always joke with people. There were times I think I got sick of eating things like swordfish because we had a lot of it. But
I could see getting sick of eating shad bakes, but swordfish, I don't know if I could ever get tired of.
But that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in a very rural part of Connecticut, so we hunted, we fished. What we ate basically was what we grew and what we caught or what we killed through, hunting. So that was a really unique experience as a child, and it kind of set the stage for me. And this career, I think, had a passion for sharing information, being an educator. I always felt as though I talked pretty well to folks and I was able to communicate things to people effectively. So growing up, I sort of involved myself in as many things as I could in school. I was in the vocational agriculture program and, learned a lot of the trades and, the applied jobs and things like that. And as I got older, I put my concentration into trying to blend the experience I got from that fishing natural upbringing into an academic setting, and I was very fortunate to be able to blend those skills together. Went and got my degrees, and here's where I am now as a professor at a university, and I am very lucky to not only be able to teach fisheries classes, but then have the flexibility to be able to run a research lab on the very things that I was brought up in and around as a child. So it's kind of come full circle, and it's been really good. But that was my journey so far.
It's great having someone who's doing research and studying bluefin tuna and other highly migratory species, which are so important to the public and so important to recreational fishermen, to have someone who's also able to communicate with that community and see that level of collaboration. We saw that in the talk you gave at the Stellwagen Charter Boat Association, and now hearing your history, I can see where that comes from. And especially with bluefin tuna, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of, I think, people not understanding kind of, for one, how bluefin tuna are managed, but also just in general, what is the state of bluefin tuna? And so maybe we'll just start right there.
Absolutely. We can start there. So bluefin has a long and sordid history. It's often portrayed as probably one of the most talked about, perhaps one of the most politicized fish on the planet. In the Western Atlantic, its history is much shorter, but in the Mediterranean, you're talking about an animal that's been harvested since before Aristotle. So if you look back, there are bluefin that are stamped into coins, so they've been on currency, they're painted onto cave walls, and they've basically been a product of commerce since I think about the 7th century AD for the Greeks, the Phoenicians, and the Romans. So this is a really old fishery. Again, in New England in particular, Gloucester, New Bedford, those are our old fishing ports, right? And, they do have a lot of history, but bluefin is one of those charismatic fish that just, when you talk about something that's been pursued for 4,000 or 5,000 years, that's a whole different thing. And through that time period, bluefin have experienced what I would call different levels of exploitation. As you can imagine, in those early years, there probably wasn't as much pressure on them. And then as technology and things progress, their populations were fished heavier. And like any other fishery, they've gone through ebbs and flows. They've gone through the ups, they've gone through the downs. And what I would say is the period that we are currently in is one of those ups. And in my opinion, it's a success story. There were a lot of conservation objectives that were put forward for this species. Was the stock as good in the 70s and 80s as it is now? Well, that's still up for debate, but I don't think one thing is perfectly clear. There are a lot of bluefin around right now. There are bluefin from Canada to Texas, and people are running into them surf casting. They're running into them deep dropping for swordfish. They're running into them everywhere they go, fishing for striped bass, and you're hooking onto a giant bluefin off of New York or something like that. So their population has certainly gone up and it's gone down. But I think one of the things that we're enjoying right now is we're enjoying one of those conservation successes. Bluefin seem to have made a comeback. And they're in a lot of places now where 10 or 15 years ago you didn't see them as much, especially the big fish.
Well, what do you credit some of that success to? Was it stuff that was put in place in the 60s or 70s, or did that come later in like the 80s, 90s, and then we're starting to reap the benefits of that?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Certainly in the U.S., we have endured a lot of regulatory actions that, things like cutting back on quotas and retention limits and things like that. And those, I think, have been to the betterment of the population. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that what we have here off of New England is a product not of New England. It is a product of the entire North Atlantic basin. And what we do as the United States does have an impact, but that impact is only amplified when we work in conjunction with other countries and other interested parties who exploit bluefin. So I think, like, for example, to get to your question, why are we where we are right now? I would say that there were conservation measures put into place by ICAT, which is the management body. ICAT stands for the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. I think Jeff mentioned this in his interview. And they are the body that basically assesses and sets up the management framework for these animals from an Atlantic-wide perspective. And not only were there conservation measures put in place in the West, there were also very large reductions in the Eastern Atlantic, more or less at the same time. This is going back, I think, don't quote me on the years, but I think it was in the middle to late 2000s when these came into place.
So I remember about probably about 20 years ago now, mid 2000s, I went on a tagging trip with Dr. Molly Ludkevich.
Yep, who was my PhD supervisor, by the way.
really?
Yes, Molly was my PhD supervisor.
We went out with Eric Stewart, east of Chatham, and she was just getting into tagging tunas. And the big story then was that bluefin tuna in the Atlantic had always been looked at as two very separate stocks. There were the ones on our side of the ocean, and then there were much more on the other side of the ocean. And her research was just starting to kind of show and prove that there was some connectivity there, and it was looking at how much connectivity there was and how they should be managed. How much has, from 20 years ago to today, how much has it changed the way we manage?
So I would go back even further. Here's kind of how I would paint the picture. Frank Mather was the inventor, if you will, of the cooperative fish and game tagging program. It was the first of its kind, and it was the first program to actually show that bluefin from the west went to the east. He had some pretty fascinating mark recaptures. These are, of course, the streamer tags, just the plastic streamer tags. And you might think of that as, well, that's a pretty unsophisticated thing. It's just a piece of nylon. Truth be told, some of Frank's most impressive recaptures, I'll give an example. He tagged a fish in 1962 off the Bahamas, and I believe that same year, he tagged it in 1962, and I think it was 50 or 51 days later, a Norwegian purse seiner caught it.
Wow.
And that was over 6,600 miles. And so that, along with many, many other recaptures, showed that this was beginning. However, they were still managed as a single stock. And then we went through a little bit of a transition period where they said, well, we originally were managing or thinking of managing them as a single stock. Now we're actually going to manage them as two. And the concept behind that was because you had a spawning ground in the west and you had a spawning ground in the east. You had small fish on both sides. And yes, we knew that there was mixing, but the extent of the mixing was one of the big things that was still debated. It was, okay, is that just a fish here or a fish there, or is there substantial exchange? And so the tagging effort, Molly's tagging efforts, Barbara's tagging efforts, and so Barbara Block's tagging efforts and so forth, once electronic tagging came into play, really started to show that, wow, it's not only the big fish that are doing these large transatlantic migrations, but it's also the small fish. And so those tagging projects started to give us a better picture, if you will, in terms of the mixing dynamics, what fish are going where and at what size classes and what times of year.
What time frame did that electronic tagging capabilities come
So the
into
first
field?
electronic tags that I'm aware of came out, the ones that we're currently using, like the mini pats or the X tags, things like that. Those came out in 1997, I believe. The first generation tags were very simple. I believe they were just what we call single point pop-ups. After that, the technology came in where the tag would actually record more variables and record for longer periods, and then you could reconstruct tracks. So the things that you see online or you see in papers, that's the end product of that technological advancement. And so beginning in the later 1990s, and certainly, as you were saying, with Molly's program in the 2000s, big fish and small fish, then you started to see the application of these tags, and it was really like an explosion of information. And that gave us a good window into seeing exactly how dynamic the mixing is. And if you fast forward to today, there is a brand new assessment and management framework for bluefin. It's called Management Strategy Evaluation. It is new. It's a little scary for some people because it's complicated. I mean, with all things that are complicated, if you don't fully understand it, and I don't claim, by the way, to be an expert and completely understand it, but I know enough about it that it's supposed to be a step forward for us. And the other thing is that although the stocks are still technically managed as two separate units, mixing is included in that. So in other words, now that we have things like otolith chemistry, now that we have electronic tagging, those are pieces of information that we didn't have 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that now can go into this framework, and we can say, all right, well, here's where certain proportions of fish of this origin are at different times of the year and so forth. So fisheries science is an evolution. We never know all the answers. We just don't. We just don't know all the answers. But through time and through the help of obviously various researchers around the Atlantic, you start to understand these things a little bit more. And so I would say where we are now compared to where we were 20 years ago are orders of magnitude ahead in terms of our understanding. where fish go.
You mentioned otolith chemistry. I think everybody understands electronic tagging and what that can show us of how fish moves. What is otolith chemistry, and what does that tell us?
Sure. So for all of the folks that view and your readership and so forth, all bony fish have what are called otoliths. So these are tiny deposits of calcium carbonate that sit in the back of the skull for teleost fishes. Some elasmobranchs have them as well. They're just really small, so you can't get them. But those three sets of otoliths are kind of, we sort of equate them sometimes to like the black box recorders on a jet. In other words, every day that a fish is alive, those otoliths accrete material. In other words, they grow, and material is added to the otolith. The material is a combination of basically chemistry. So saltwater fish obviously are eating things, and when they swallow something, they swallow not only the food, but they swallow the water. At the same time, as the fish is going through the water, it has to breathe, so the water goes across its gills. So whether it's the barrier in the intestine or the digestive tract, or if it's the barrier on the gills, those chemical signatures are entering the body of the fish, and they end up eventually in that inner ear. Now, Dave Secor and Jay Rooker, I believe, were the first proponents of using what we call otolith chemistry as a way to delineate the stocks of bluefin. And so the idea behind this is the first step in this, let's back up to the first step. The first step is you catch little bluefins, like maybe 8-9 inches long, a foot long. And the reason you catch small bluefins is because, as I just mentioned before, soon as they're big enough, they travel. So you don't want them to travel. You want the little ones. And those little ones, you capture them in the East Atlantic, and you capture the really small ones in the West. And the idea behind that is you've captured a Mediterranean chemical signature, and you've captured a Western Atlantic chemical signature. So what do? You take those little guys, and you get values and values, East and West. So you know that they came from, or you hope you know that they came from each spawning ground. Then what you can do is you sample the adults. The adults are your unknowns. Those are fish you don't know the origin. And then what you do is you get their signature, and the computer kind of does a allocation. Where does this otolith go based on its signature? So you have a known and a known. Here's all your unknowns. The computer then says, all right, which is this closest to of the knowns? And it starts to basically allocate fish to each stock. It's not a perfect method. There's a lot of noise in the signal, okay? There's a lot of noise. I just want to be upfront about that. It's not that we can classify every single fish to a spawning ground or to a side of the Atlantic. The problem is the probability of which we do it. If it's 90% probability, then we have a lot of confidence. Yeah. If it's 48, well, I might as well take a coin out of my pocket and just start flipping it because I'll get the same allocations, right? So what I'll emphasize is that it is a very useful method, and we have for many, many years now been able to get a ton of great information out of it to understand what we call stock composition. So now I work with Dr. Lisa Kerr, who's an associate professor at UMaine. She does a lot of the otolith chemistry as well. And what we do is we basically collect otoliths from the industry. This is both commercial and recreational. There's no difference. So from our perspective, a tuna is a tuna, and it doesn't matter the gear for us, and it doesn't matter if it's a stakeholder that's a commercial representative or recreational. We want all of that information. No one fish is any more valuable than the other fish. Every fish tells a story. It doesn't matter, and you never know what that fish is going to tell you, depending on whether it comes from a guy who's going out on a weekend and he might catch 2 fish all season, or the guy that's catching 150 fish in the general category. It doesn't matter. They all tell a story, and they're all super important. So we can then take that information, and for every single year and gear type, time of year, things like that, we can set up these tables which basically tell us from what stock of origin each of those bluefin are. So 60-40, 50-50, 90-10, etc. So let's say that the three of us go out into the Gulf of Maine and we catch 100 fish and we analyze those. We can get the mixing proportions for those fish. We can say that, okay, well, 70% of these fish came from the Eastern Atlantic and 30% came from the Western Atlantic. I say that, again, with
margin for error.
Exactly. Yeah, there's some area in there because we have things like the slope C, and we have water chemistry that is not as absolute as we would like it to be. And for example, the Med has a very distinct signature in it, but everything else in the Atlantic proper, including the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean stuff, that signal is all very similar. So it's not as though we can say, yes, these fish off of North Carolina are one stock, and these fish off of Georgia are one stock, and these fish off of Massachusetts. Sure. You can't do that. It's really more like a bulk. It's left or right, yep. East or west is what we're doing. And then, like I said, you have a lot of fish where we just can't get a confident allocation, and so those fish have to be thrown out because we do have a metric you have to meet, and if you don't meet that, those samples.
So I mean, essentially, those benchmarks from the otolith of really juvenile species, that gives you that signature to be able to assign it when it's higher than, the probability is high enough. And it gives you a gauge on the health of the western stock versus the eastern stock, amongst other.
So one of the things that it helps us with, and I can give you a great example.
Everglades Boats is an industry leader in premium offshore fishing boats. Founded in 1997 by boating industry legend and former Boston Whaler executive Bob Doherty, Everglades revolutionized the boat building industry with the invention of the ram cap process for one-piece unsinkable hulls. Respected for its renowned hull ride, Everglades builds center console and hybrid boats from 25 to 45 feet that make a statement about the status and savvy of their owner. Everglades has received numerous industry awards and achieved an unparalleled reputation for superior safety, performance, and quality. For more information about Everglades Boats, stop by your local dealer or visit evergladesboats.com. Everglades Boats, built for beyond.
So again, remember, they're managed as two stocks.
Yep.
We know for a fact, and I'll quote some of Lisa's outcomes, but we know that the otoliths that we've collected in our lab that Lisa has worked up, or Lisa's lab has worked up, show that in any given year, and this is going back to 2010, so we've got like a 14 or 15 year time series now. And this is primarily the commercial category, but in primarily the commercial size bluefin, we know that in any given year, generally speaking, between 50 and 73 or 74% of the fish that are harvested on this side have an eastern origin. So we are what we are called a heavily subsidized western fishery with eastern subsidies. Okay, and why is that important? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, if you are assessing the stock separately and you have a large contribution from the east, you want to know that, because otherwise you could be looking at something that to your eyes looks inflated, but it might not be inflated. It might not be as good as you think it is, right? If it's a separate stock. On the other side of the coin, from our interest, if they mix extensively, well, then that's just the way that it is, and they mix extensively, and our fishery interests are now linked to the eastern interests. And so it's really important to get that understanding, because if our fishery is heavily subsidized, we want to make sure that it's known that anything that the East proposes impacts us. And so we want to be able to have a seat at the table. If the Eastern Atlantic, and without naming names, but let's just say that there are countries in the Eastern Atlantic that are advocating for, say, maybe a very large quota increase or something. Well, we want to know about that, because that can impact us. Exactly. It can directly impact us because there's a proportion of fish that come from the east and go to the west. So we want to know about that, right? So it's really important to get those otoliths that you were just talking about from those juveniles, especially, because they're the ones that are going to tell us the story about what's going on. One way or the other, they're going to. It can help us. It's not hurting us. It's helping us to know that the fishery is so mixed. It really is helping us, because that gives us more information.
Yeah, it's amazing to think of how much science has contributed just in the past few decades to the way we manage bluefin tuna. And we started off by talking about bluefin are in a good place right now in an upswing through better management. So much of that has been informed by science. I mean, we were managing in kind of a black box before of not realizing that.
But I would add a caveat to that.
Okay.
So much of what we've learned is really the result of the fishery. Mm-hmm. And I'll elaborate a little bit for you. So yes, we've got the tools, we've got the stats, and we have a lot of the abilities to be able to process the data, analyze the data, present the data, and so forth. But without the industry and the participation of the industry, we have nothing. And I'll elaborate a little bit. So each year, our lab collects somewhere between 1,400 and 2,000 giants. That's how much we sample. We sample about roughly 25 or 30% of the entire general category fishery, which includes charter boat for sale endorsements. So that's big, that's huge. How can we do that? How can we do it? We can do it because we've built a huge network. People are excited about the stuff we're doing, but more importantly, they save them for us. And it's not only the fishing groups, it's also the dealers. The dealers are a big part of this as well. And on the recreational side of things, we have guys that not only will sample for us, but they're like, oh yeah, I'll throw them and their freezer is full of heads, along with their broccoli and their everything else. So I really want to emphasize how important the industry has been. And when I say industry, it's the collective, it's the rec guys and it's the commercial guys. How important their contributions have been to the science. That goes for the biological sampling, otoliths, mussel, liver, gonads, and it also goes for the tagging because we work with a lot of boats. Molly's worked with a lot of boats. Barbara's worked with a lot of boats. There's a lot of people that have worked with boats, and without those platforms, you don't get those tags out. So it really is an industry. It really is kind of an industry-driven success story. They're the ones. They could just as easily have said, "I'm not going to save 100. You want me to save 100-pound head that I just cut off of this fish, and I could just easily throw it in the ocean and not have to worry about it?" But they don't. A lot of the guys will cut them off. They might put them in the chill tanks, or they cut them off, or they leave them on specifically, and they go to the dealers, and we get them from the dealers. Or for the rec guys, they bring the heads. When they're done cleaning the fish, they save them. They'll put them in bags. They put them in their own freezers. They call us up. It's really been, in my opinion, it's been a success story in terms of cooperative research. Yeah. That's how I view it. It's just been such a wonderful experience to work with the folks that are participating in the fishery. It really has.
That's a great story, and it's so important. I think fishermen, for the most part, understand that better science leads to better management, which leads to better fishing, and they're happy to participate. Along those lines, are there any opportunities right now for recreational tuna fishermen who are out there listening that maybe want to help contribute to the science? What should they do?
Yep, absolutely. So I can provide all of the information that you need, but we have, among others, a sampling program that's dedicated to collecting information from non-lethally harvested fish. So, for example, otoliths. You can collect otoliths from every fish, but they don't release very well when you cut their head off. So we're going to avoid that. But we have some very exciting genetic techniques that are on the table now that are being piloted. And so recreational fishermen, if they want to participate, can do so in two ways. One, they can certainly contact us, and if they do kill fish and they keep the heads, those would be super valuable. The juveniles, I will be honest with you, the juveniles are where the holes are right now. We're doing okay with the adults, like I said, because of the efforts and
the commercial fishermen's plugged into what you guys are doing. They understand the value, and those fish die because they're going to market.
Exactly, they're dead.
And when you say juvenile, what size?
Anything under 73 inches. Okay. 73 inches is the commercial minimum in the United States, which, by the way, is the highest in the world.
So out of the otoliths that you get, what's the percentage of 73-inch plus fish otoliths
versus the small ones?
The small ones. How big of a gap is that?
Oh, huge.
90-10?
Yeah, or a little bit more, probably more. Okay. So we are really trying to make a push for the juvenile otoliths. Now, if saving the heads is logistically challenging, and it can be, and I understand that, we have this genetics program. We can get you involved. Contact us. You fill out a quick form. It's not like we need all your information because we want to keep an eye on you. We need the information because we FedEx you these sample kits overnight, and we'll give you all the instructions and everything, and it's really easy. You bring those fish to the boat, you take a small little clip of their fin. We have vials, they're all labeled, they're all organized. You just drop it in there, give it a shake, and you are done. And then we have free shipping, so we mail to you, and you can mail back your samples. They're in a salt solution. It's not formalin. It's nothing that's hazardous or anything like that. And so it's not going to hurt you if you spill it. It's no big deal. It's just salt. It's going to dry and become a really concentrated salt solution. So folks can participate that way, where they can actually contribute these genetic samples or these DNA samples, and they can send those to us in the lab.
And that's all you need. You don't, they don't have to like record. Or do they give you, you know, length or
that? Yeah, we would love for that information. So the other information that's on the sheet is the date. Date is important.
Yep.
We also would like to know the length if they can get it.
Yep.
We understand it's not always possible to get
estimates?
that.
Estimates work.
Yep. You
but
got to do the
length
best
is
you can.
best.
I mean, it's just we take what we can. Ideally, we'd like a length that would be great. But if you have to estimate it, or if it's something that's not logistically possible, hey, you go down, you get the genetic sample. The guy that's wiring is holding the fish. It shakes its head and it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, that happens. We all know that happens. There's all
Sure.
kinds of things that can happen on the water. So. And then other things, you know, if you can give us a location, I'm not looking for people's secrets.
Yeah.
It's not like I have a chart that I plot everybody. We just would like to know
General area.
General area.
Yeah.
You know, okay, you're on Middle Bank, you're on the Regal Sword, you're here, you're whatever. That's even fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had labels come in before, and it's like location, and it says Atlantic Ocean. That's not real useful. That's not real useful.
Location, Nunya.
But yeah, that's an easy way for folks to get involved, and we can share all of the information with you. We have a lab Facebook page and a lab Instagram page, and we soon are going to be launching a website as well that folks can interact with and get some more information. So I can share all of that with you. It's really easy. And the other thing that I would stress is, again, you don't have to be somebody that's catching 500 of these fish a year. If you get a kit from us and you send us back 3, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because you're 3 and you're 2 and this guy's 4 and this guy's 5 and maybe this guy's 100. Maybe we get somebody who's just, you know, dynamite and catching them all the time, and that's their job. Maybe they're a charter boat, and that's exactly what they do, is they target bluefin. Understandable. They all add up. They all add up. And like I said before, you never know which of those fish is going to give you that piece of information that prior to you didn't know about. That's the cool thing. Same thing goes with tagging. You know, you can tag a fish and you can assume, okay, well, I tagged it here and most of these fish all did this. But then you get that one that does something you never expected it to. It goes to North Africa. It goes here. It goes there. So every fish is important. It doesn't matter if you catch 1 or you catch 1,000. For us, it doesn't matter. They're all valuable scientifically.
So from the recreational side, the fin clip initiative that you guys have going on, that's super important. Is there a way to get involved on the tagging side recreationally as well?
So the tagging, so the electronic tagging, we only have a couple of boats.
Sure.
But if people are interested, they can certainly reach out to me. I'd also highlight that there's a program through the National Marine Fisheries Service that's Frank Mather's original cooperative game fish tagging program. I believe Molly is still doing some conventional tagging as well. I think her program was Tag It Tiny, I
Yep.
believe was the name of her program. So if folks are interested in like conventional tagging, there's 3 routes. Let me highlight the 3 routes. One is the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, which is the original, I think, cooperative game fish tagging program. Molly also has tags. And then third, either through me or through someone else at the Southeast Center, if you would like to get ICAT tags, ICAT has a program too. And you can tag those with the nylon tags from the international community. If it's in terms of electronic tagging, that's something that folks can just reach out to us.
Sure.
It's either there are some, I will say, when we do our tagging, we do have some requirements. We generally bring the fish on the boat,
Yeah.
so having a door is really beneficial.
Yeah.
Even if it's a 80-pounder, no one wants to really rail one up over the side, 80-pounder. You can, but it's easier if it's a door.
Better on the fish to-
Exactly,
to
it's
do
better
it.
on the fish. So, but folks can certainly reach out. Folks can certainly reach out.
And we'll
We're
pull
happy to-
together everything we've just talked about. We'll do the best as we can. We'll pull that together for a post
Yeah.
on our website of ways for
Sure.
tuna fishermen to get involved.
Yep, that would be wonderful.
So we've talked about everything we've learned about tuna recently, and we know a lot more than we used to, but there's a lot we don't know. What do you see as kind of, what are the biggest unanswered questions, or what questions could we answer that would be the most helpful for tuna management going forward?
So there are several things that I think are really important. If you're familiar, I'm sure you are, or at least your readers probably are, or your listeners. In, I believe, 2015 or 2016, we had the discovery of larvae in the Slope Sea off of basically the east coast of the U.S. It extends from North Carolina all the way up along Georgia's bank. So traditionally, it was thought you had the Med, and then you had the Gulf of Mexico. Let's call it the Gulf of Mexico region, because it also extended into the Caribbean a little bit as well. But now we know that the Slope Sea, at least from what we've been able to get so far, and this is like Dave Richardson at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and folks like that, we do know that that seems to be kind of a unique area. It's different spatially and temporally than, say, the Gulf of Mexico. So anybody that is collecting or fishing in those areas, guys are fishing the canyons, for example, and they catch bluefins in the canyons. You catch bluefins in the canyons. Super important to sample those fish. It'd be great to sample those fish. That would be a huge thing to be able to, contribute to this. We don't know a lot about the Slope Sea. So collecting, adults or juveniles anywhere in and around that area would be very beneficial. There are still some long outstanding issues regarding age of maturity, although the issue of age of maturity in the West versus the East is probably not as prominent of an issue as it was years ago, but still there are some uncertainties. Based on what we see in our tagging data, and I can't speak for Barbara or Molly or any of the other groups that are tagging, Tristan Royer and folks in other parts of the Atlantic, we are seeing fish do different things. Why? I can't tell you, but I can tell you, and I can even share a track or two with you if you want to post it. We are seeing a lot of fish now that stay very local. They're in the Gulf of Maine. They go out to the seamounts for a few months, and then they come right back to the Gulf of Maine. They don't go to the Med. They don't go to the Gulf of Mexico. And if they do go to the Slope Sea, if you want to call it the Slope Sea, it's got to be at that northern margin. And so I think there's a lot with movement and migration dynamics that we still don't understand, even though there's been a lot of tags put out on fish. I think what you're witnessing are changes. I think some components of the fishery or the stocks are changing. I will say this, and this gets back a little bit to the success story of Bluefin. Let me elaborate on that. Sorry, not to go on a rabbit hole,
No,
but let's
please
elaborate
do.
that in a little bit. We now have tagging programs that are taking place in areas that either A, haven't had bluefin or 30 or 40 years, or B, have bluefin and never maybe had them before. I'll give you some examples. There is a tagging program in Norway. There's a tagging program in Sweden. There's a tagging program in the UK. There's been one in Ireland for a while, but they're seeing a lot more fish. So you have fish now that are distributed in areas that they haven't been in a long time. And so understanding what those fish are doing is also one of the big challenges or big unknowns, is because Norway hasn't had fish since the 70s or late 60s. I think it was late 60s or early 70s. So it's been 40 or 50 years. And so now that the fish are back, it's an opportunity, right? I would say even the same thing in the Western Atlantic. We have fish now that are in places that we haven't seen them in a long time. Off of New Jersey, right? The last couple of years, there's been these big runs of large fish. Off of New York now, we've got fish that seem to be there most of the year. Off of Rhode Island, last year they had that, bite of really big fish off of Rhode Island. So there's opportunities now still to tag fish in places where, those fish haven't been in a decade or two or three or more. And who knows what that's going to tell us about where they come from or where they're going, where they're spawning, those types of things. Again, I think there's a lot of information to understand about the stock dynamics in terms of the proportions of fish that are coming here each year. They definitely change with size. It seems as though the smaller size classes of bluefin are the ones that are more heavily mixed. In other words, the smaller size classes, higher proportion of eastern fish. And then as they get into the older size classes, those are the fish that tend to have a more dominant western signal. I joke around with people. Obviously, this is just a joke, but I joke around with people. It's like, they come over here from the Med as, prepubescent teens, mess around a little while, and then they go back to the, Mediterranean, and that's where they stay. But some of the tagging data bears that out too. They come to the West for a little while, they spend some time, and, and then they go back to the East. So I would say, to maybe make that answer a little bit more succinct, reproductive biology is a big one in terms of the adults, when they spawn, where they spawn, the contributions of the slope C. We know that it's an area. How important is it? What is it contributing? Certainly, movement and mixing, again, especially in regions and in areas and size classes of fish that we haven't seen in a long time. What are they doing? Where are those fish going? How are they contributing to the stock? How are they susceptible to fishing mortality and so forth? I would also add, too, that diet is changing considerably for bluefin, or at least for what we sample, it's changing a lot. It's gone through a pretty big transition, and understanding the diet of bluefin, in my opinion, is very important, because in most cases, what the top predators are eating is also an exploited resource.
Right.
And the trick to all of this is to balance that, right? It's not as though we want to take away a resource from fishing group A and solely give it to fishing group B, or B to A, or vice versa. But by understanding what the fish are eating, we can say, all right, so bluefin are eating species X or species Y, seabirds are eating species X, species Y, therefore we need to consider that when we're talking about exploitation, those types of things. And those are really important, because again, if you look at bluefin, traditionally, if you go back in time, their main food, and when I say main food, the way that we quantify this is what we call by percent weight. In other words, if you took the totality of all the things in a bluefin stomach and you weighed them, the largest amount of weight would be taken up, again, historically, it was Atlantic herring. Atlantic herring are a schooling fish. They were very abundant, and they're also what we call high energy prey, meaning they've got a lot of fat in them. And it's like eating a Big Mac versus a piece of iceberg lettuce. That, if you want to really boil it down, if you're eating sea cucumbers versus herring, you're going to get a different nutritional return on that investment. So herring have, for the longest time, been a very important historical prey item for them. And that changed again, it's hard for us to determine exactly when it changed, but I can tell you that from our stomachs in 2018 and 2019, that diet shifted to short-fin squid. That was very temporary. That only lasted about a year or two. And by 2019, actually even a little bit before that, 2018, 2019, we were starting to see this uptick in menhaden consumption. And now, menhaden, again, it's only for the stomachs that we sample. So again, could our sample be biased? It could, but we're sampling 200 to 300 stomachs. Those stomachs now show that menhaden, I'm from Connecticut, New York, we call them bunker. In Maine, they call them pogies.
Yeah, here on Cape Cod, we call them both.
We call them both. Okay, so again, another small, schooling, high-energy fish now comprises about 60 to 70% of the diet. So perhaps fortuitously, with the decline in herring, menhaden have maybe taken its place temporarily. That's not to say that one is better than the other. It's not to say that, just because we have menhaden now we don't need herring. That's not the case at all. Mm-hmm. All I'm saying is maybe we're lucky that the menhaden showed up when they did, because if the herring stock had declined like it had, bluefin may not have stuck around. If the squid were gone and then all of a sudden the herring are gone, well, they're a predator. They come here to eat. So if there's no... We equate this a little bit sometimes to, I guess, gaming theory. Win, stay, lose, leave, right? Yeah. You're at the table, you're throwing the dice, and you are on a streak. Are you going to walk away? Or are you going to stay there until you lose? Are you going to walk away? Or are you going to...
step on the gas.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're a bluefin or any other predator, seabird, it doesn't matter what it is, but if you're in an ecological situation whereby there is a gain, there is an energetic gain for you, you're going to stay, right? You're going to stay. So whether it's fortuitous or not, it's just to explain that there has been a dietary shift. Menhaden, mackerel, Atlantic herring, short-fin squid, they're all exploited species, right? We harvest them, right? So again, the idea is that you identify what the animals, the top predators, are eating, and hopefully by that you can integrate it to some of these other frameworks and say, all right, well, we have all these animals. And by the way, I'm leaving out lots of other animals. I'm leaving out the whales. I'm leaving out the sea. I'm leaving out all these other things. But I'm an HMS guy, so I'm focusing on fish. But that's the idea. You identify what things are eating, what's important, and then if those are exploited resources, you want to make sure that there's
Everything
production
has to be
space.
factored. I mean, the healthy situation of bluefin tuna means those tunas are eating more from those
Exactly.
prey species, and we're all taking them. The whales are eating them. We're harvesting them. The tunas are. The stripers are. It's a balancing act that you're gonna have to figure out, like looking ahead at how to kind of keep it all happy. One question on the you've delved into the stomach studies that you've done, and you talked about some crazy finds in stomachs, but also how does that change from predominantly feeding on sea herring to now relying on pogies or bunker? How does that change the quality of the fish or the state of the fish that's feeding on that's going through that change, that dietary change?
So that's an excellent and also extremely complex question for me to answer, but I'll try to shed some light on this. So there are several things to look at. First and foremost is not every piece of forage is created the same energetically. Okay? Every animal has a different amount of protein and a different amount of fat in it, and that changes potentially seasonally. For example, herring are not going to have the same fat content in 1 month as they do in another month because they have a seasonal cycle too. Bluefin are the same exact way. So first and foremost, not every food item is created equal. We find, as I shared with you, that bluefin tend to concentrate on these kind of high energy prey resources. Now, we've actually done some work. Sammy Netto, who was a grad student with me and now is my lab manager, she actually did some energetic studies on the prey. That part of our research is in its infancy. And by energetics, what I'm saying is we take a whole menhaden and we chop it all up, right? We homogenize it. We make it into a nice menhaden soup. We do the same thing with herring and mackerel and everything else. And then we have a machine at the lab that will analyze the amount of energy, calories, that comes out of that sample. And so what that does is it gives you the ability to say, okay, a herring has X number of calories per gram or kilocalories per gram, and a menhaden has so much energy per unit, and a mackerel and so forth. And you can start to put together these matrices or tables, if you will, of prey energetic content. And you can kind of see how the animals, some of them in particular, I don't know if I want to call it selecting, but they're certainly eating a higher proportion of those higher energy prey. So again, herring historically was the dominant one, and now it's shifted to menhaden. Menhaden and herring are very similar in their energetic content. Menhaden might even be a little bit higher. And so how does that impact the condition? So this is theoretical at this point.
Sure.
But my belief is that if they are eating those herring and they're eating the menhaden, in theory, they should get a lot higher energetic return than if they're eating short fin squids or silver hake or something like that, because there are such differences in the energetic return when eating those two things. I mean, this is really complex. You can get into digestion efficiency and all those things. So in theory, that quality should be better in those fish. I have a student, Kay Zip, who's working on some of the quality aspects of bluefin, and I did some work on this in my PhD when I was in Molly's lab as well, and we definitely have seen changes in the quality of bluefin. Their quality has gone down considerably in a lot of cases. The fat content seems to have gone down. Some of this is through grading data, so all of the commercial dealers will grade the fish to get an idea of how good the fish is, where it might go to market and things like that. And then the other one is by a fishery scientist that works in my lab, John Carlucci. He's doing what we call condition indices on the fish, basically looking at how plump the fish is. And in both cases, they do show transition. The quality seems to be going down in a lot of cases. And it's like, well, why is that happening? Because you've got lots of menhaden and, you did have herring. It's really complicated. Again, if you have one thing to think about here and why the story might be a little bit complicated is if you have 50 to 70% of your fish in the Gulf of Maine that are coming from the east or have an eastern signature, there may be differences in their timing of arrival. I think historically we all thought, well, the bluefin show up in May and June, they stay here for 5 or 6 months, and then they leave. And in that 5 or 6 months, they fatten. But I'm more in line to think that throughout the summer, it's a very complicated story. Yes, there are fish that are showing up and probably staying, but then I think there are fish that are showing up and then they're going. And then I think their fish might be coming in and going out and coming back. And then they're arriving at all sorts of different times. A colleague of mine that works at the Massachusetts Department of Marine Fisheries, John Logan's got some isotope data on some bluefin from some of his work. And it indicates that a lot of those fish that he had sampled or we had sampled seem to be arriving later in the season, meaning that they're not getting here in May and June, but you may be catching a fish that's only been here for 2 weeks. So if you set your lines out, it's September, right? The September sub-period quota opens up. You go out in September and you catch a fish, and it is a rail. It's really skinny. You're like, how is this possible? This fish has been here for 3 months.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. The fish might have just got there, and you actually hooked it, right? I mean, it was the unlucky one. It took the hook. And so there's a lot of complexities about how you connect diet quality and tuna quality. But I can tell you some generalities, and I'll just highlight those.
Sure.
The quality seems to have gone down. There's no question, I think. I don't think anybody would argue, or at least anybody who's been in the business long enough would argue that the fish of the 70s and 80s are very different than the fish of the 2010s or the 2020s are in terms of their quality. There are some hints that in some years, the quality comes up a little bit, but I don't think that overall we are seeing the same proportions of fat in the big fish that you saw, several decades ago. And so obviously the question is, why is that? And I guess everything that I've just said leads up to the answer of it's really complicated and I don't know, because you've got the mixing dynamics of bluefin, then you have the complexity of the prey. I'll also add this. We had a student at UMaine who did work on Atlantic herring, James Becker from Maine Department of Marine Resources, and his work showed that herring are also not as fat now as they used to be. So it could be a cascade effect, right? So now you've got a high energy prey, but the high energy prey isn't at the same level it used to be 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And so it's a cascade effect. For every one of those herring that a bluefin is grabbing, it's not quite as big as it, or not quite as energetic as it was before. And so it has to get more of them. So again, I know I sound a little political in my answer.
Perhaps more calories.
Yeah,
in
but
pursuit
it's
of getting more
but
of
it's a
them.
complicated issue. You can't just say yes because there's menhaden here. However, you can say, and I would stand behind this, that the higher energy prey are the important ones. So Atlantic herring is an important one. Atlantic menhaden is an important one. So you need those high energy prey resources. You definitely need those.
The people at Z-Man Fishing have been dedicated to ignoring the book on traditional lure making, instead setting out to create truly category-defining lures, soft baits, and jig systems that simply catch fish. At Z-Man, authentic innovation remains a badge of honor, recognized and admired by countless fans worldwide. I'm one of those fans. I've fished countless Z-Man products in both fresh and salt, from their chatterbaits to their soft plastics made from a material they call Elastec. Some of the most naturally acting, durable soft baits I've ever fished. I've caught PBs on their smallest baits, like on a massive brown trout, choked a micro finesse TRD while targeting smallies, to hooking giant tarpon and redfish on their diesel minnows, which are also phenomenal striper baits. The best part is, when bluefish show up, they'll hold up to them too. Give them a look at zmanfishing.com or ask for them at your local shop.
So in this system where we're trying to find simple answers, they're so dynamic and complicated. On top of all of this, you have change over time in the oceanography, changes in currents and water temperatures. I can't imagine you can say that, what effects those have had, but I guess you're seeing that those are having effects as well.
So, yeah, I wouldn't say that I can give you the quantitative measurements to it, and whether they're correlated or there's causation, in other words, whether they're linked. But we certainly now are seeing fish in places that maybe either historically we weren't looking, or they are there now. Brian McKenzie's got some papers out. They're getting bluefin in mackerel trawls in Greenland. So there's the propensity that the animals are actually shifting their their distributions. The distributions are certainly moving. The question of bluefin and climate is a tough one to tackle. And the reason I say that is because so most of the highly migratories, especially the true tunas and the lamnid sharks, they have the ability to stay warm, right? They've got that specialized circulatory system, so they can stay warm. And remember, this is an animal, and when you look back at the tagging data, this animal goes from the surface to over 5,500 feet below the surface in a matter of a minute or two. And we know this because the tags that we use anyway have a fail-safe. If the tag is approaching or goes below 1,700 meters, it jettisons because it'll go potentially past crush depth. So we know that they go that deep. So they are experiencing an incredible amount of temperature differences vertically. Horizontally, how much that's impacting them, I don't know. Can they tell that small of a degree difference? Maybe they can. I think more importantly, what's driving them, and this makes perfect sense, and this is probably what the industry would say, it's the food. So if the food is impacted by your circulation changes, your temperature changes, then
they're
exactly
equipped to follow.
They're a follower.
Do you think that's
they're not a leader?
That's like one of the more likely reasons why they're showing up in places they haven't been for so long?
I think so. I think it's a product of prey, of food. You're getting those large Menhaden schools off of places like New York and New Jersey, and they're capitalizing. Now, the other way to look at this is you might say, well, no, we've had big bunker schools off New Jersey for 10 years now, and they've only showed up in the last 3.
Sea herring offshore that they didn't have to come in.
And that's the thing, right? You've got to think of a bluefin as basically an ocean sampler, okay? And they're going through the water column. Just because you have all of these different pods of prey throughout the ocean doesn't mean that the predator is going to find in or exploit everyone. It might take them some time to do it. But we do know that they have, at least they seem to, they've got institutional memory. In other words, they remember. I have this, Molly's got this, Barb's got this. I'm sure folks, I know the folks in the UK and Sweden have this. You tag a fish, a year later, the tag pops off, in some cases, a mile from where you tagged it. So there's got to be some memory there where they know, hey, I did well here, and I'm going to come back. And so you might have aggregations of prey in other places, but you might not have those predators. Why? Well, maybe it's just that they didn't find them yet, or they didn't need to find them yet. Like you said, they might be offshore. They might not have the need to come in. But there's certainly, I don't think there's any denying that with this resurgence of bait that's showing up in different places and the predators are finding them, now you're seeing those bluefins. It's probably a combination effect. A, there's more bluefin, and B, the food is in more places, so they're gonna find it eventually. They're not stupid. They're not as stupid as we think.
Anybody who's fished for giant bluefin tuna knows that they are one of the most intelligent creatures in the world, somewhere between chimpanzees and humans. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know about that. I will say this, and I can send you some pictures if you want. So the brain of about a 600-pound bluefin is no bigger than my thumbnail. That's about it. So my joke to everybody, like when I do these offshore fishing seminars and done Damon's and done the Stellwagen Bank, is I always end with a picture of the giant bluefin brain, and I say, for all of the hiding of the hooks and the alcohol swabbing of the line, I said, this is what you're up against, But in all seriousness, though, what I do find amazing about them is that they do travel back to the same areas. And what I, for example, will emphasize to my students when I teach classes on fisheries is think about this. So if I ask you to go to whatever, I ask you to go to a certain location, you're going to find that location either based on institutional knowledge. In other words, you've been there a lot. There's landmarks. Your parents took you there, whatever. You have your GPS. You have your iPhone, whatever it is. You can find it. The other thing about being on land is you can see things. Imagine this for a second. You're in the Gulf of Maine. Doesn't matter where you are. The optical properties are pretty much the same. You're in the Gulf of Maine. You're a bluefin. You can see, on a good day, 40 feet for those who scuba dive. If the water's really good, 40, 50 feet, maybe. Some years it's, in conditions it's 20 feet. So this fish that can see about 20 feet to 40 feet in front of it, right? It is swimming all over the place. Will leave the Gulf of Maine. We've had tags. Other people have tags. This is not specific to us. They'll go over to the Med, go over to North Africa, go down to the Bahamas, go into the Gulf of Mexico, they'll find their way right back to the Gulf of Maine in a medium that has no reference.
How the hell
How?
is that possible? Because
No idea.
like I was going to ask this question
no
before
reference.
we started down this road. Like how is
We
that
don't know.
possible?
We don't know. They have no reference. I get lost at the mall, right? So I
Yeah.
can't find my car when I go to Logan. You know, I have to take a picture of the sign to say I parked on level U. You know what I mean? And yet these animals are able to do it. So to get to your question about intelligence, I'm not going to put them on the level of humans and chimpanzees because we've had several tagged fish that have been recaptured the same week or the next week. So obviously they're not getting the message that when they bite that bait necessarily they're going to get hooked. However, what I will say, and one of the most fascinating aspects of nature is that animals have abilities that we don't fully understand. You know, again, you're traveling, that fish is traveling tens, if you were to count all of the enumerations of that track, in other words, the ups, the downs, the tilts, the back and forths, everywhere that tuna goes in the water column, you're talking tens of thousands of miles over the period of a year. And it does that and it comes back to the same exact spot. How does it know that? It can't possibly keep track of every twist and turn. It is strictly amazing. So how they do it is really, you know, unknown, but they do.
They don't
so.
use their brain to do that.
I don't know what they're using.
They're small. They're so small. They got something else that chimpanzees and humans don't.
But they are such an amazing species. Anytime I've harvested a tuna, I'm always kind of in awe looking at it and feeling that appreciation just in the terms of the physical adaptations, looking at the fins, the body, the finlets, the way that this thing is built to swim, to eat. And there's an entire other level now that I'm learning about that bluefin have this ability, trying to picture them migrating back, you know, across the ocean and all the way back.
Perfect ocean predator.
Yeah, they are the
Yeah.
coolest fish species in our waters, no doubt.
Yeah, their morphology and their physiology is geared towards, I mean, a marathon runner, right? I mean, they're not the fastest fish in the ocean, but I would put a lot of money that they're the strongest and have the most endurance because they certainly can swim for a long time at a fairly good rate of speed. So for sure.
So staying in the science realm,
Yep.
obviously, you know, are standing in the world order and all that. Where is science outside of the U.S. in some of the other nations that we're collaborating with to, you know, unlock these secrets and hopefully move towards better management of a shared stock? Like, are they just kind of like, yeah, you guys do your thing and present it to us, or is this science playing out in other parts of the world?
Nope. So actually, there are a lot of countries in the Atlantic Basin that are part of ICAT that do have active research programs. Those countries are inside the Med as well as outside the Med. So you've got the European Union, which is 26 votes at ICAT. I think it represents 26 countries. So you have a lot of the EU that has active research programs. You have the Mediterranean countries, North African countries, Scandinavian countries, as I said, UK, and so forth. We have close collaborations with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, Alex Hank's group up there, so we do a lot of work with them. So what I would say is that ICAT, several years ago, I want to say maybe 15 years ago, ICAT launched a program specifically aimed at understanding bluefin biology more. And in that time period, we have learned a ton. That program was international. We also have a domestic program here in the United States that focuses on that. Comparatively, it's a relatively small program, but what I would say is that the interest is across the basin. Our lab, I would say, has been more successful than most labs in terms of like collecting samples and things like that. What that's due to, I can't specifically say. I have a lot of hardworking people. That's one thing. But second to that is, like I said, that partnership that we have, you know, with the industry. But there are tagging programs, there are sampling programs, observers and monitoring programs that are taking place. Are they taking place at the same level as things here in the States or maybe in Canada? Maybe not. But there is an effort to try to understand bluefin biology more. I can't tell you that it's equal across all of the different countries, but there's interest there, and there is some deliverables there. So when we go, like for example, when the scientific branch of ICAT meets, the SCRS, Standing Committee on Research and Statistics, when they meet, lots of countries will present at those meetings. And Sometimes it's related to biology. Sometimes it's related to their fishing fleet. What are they catching? How, what's their, did they have an index or something like that they're producing? So there is a pretty, good effort. I would highlight, if you don't mind, something that we're all trying to become heavily invested in from the science end, and that's what's called close kin mark recapture. So in the Western Atlantic, we have a pilot program, ourselves, DFO in Canada, NOAA itself, and the folks at the Southeast Fisheries Science Center. We're all working on that close kin project. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail here in a second. At the same time, based on the pilot study that we've done here, ICAT is trying to do the same thing in the Med. And if that happens, then you truly will have this integrated Atlantic-wide research program for both stocks sort of co-occurring. So let me get into close kin just a little bit. And this relates back to the importance of particularly the recreational fishery and the contribution that they can make. So there are several things we can do with genetics. The first one is I'll talk about close kin. Matt Loretta at the Southeast Center would be the authority on this, but I will do my best. So close kin is a way to identify genetic relationships between parents and their offspring. We call them POPs, P-O-P, parent-offspring pairs. And what you try to do is you take the DNA of the adult and you try to match it to any of its offspring. Right now, primarily that's been in the form of larvae in the Gulf of Mexico. And we have a lot of matches, believe it or not. So the adults that are captured up here in New England and in the Canadian Maritimes, Gulf of St. Lawrence, etc., we have the matches, the genetic matches to the larvae in the Gulf of Mexico that NOAA has sampled. First, that's amazing, not unexpected. You'd hope that their offspring would be related, but here's the cool part about one of three aspects of that project. Historically, when we've tried to assess the status of a stock, we do so with what we call relative biomass. So we report it in what's called spawning stock biomass. In other words, how much weight of adult reproductively active fish do we have? For the sake of easy math, let's just say 100,000 tons. It doesn't tell us the numbers of fish. Close kin mark recapture is actually a way to get a physical number. And so how many bluefin in the Atlantic, in the Western Atlantic, are there that are over, and I'm just going to throw a number out, 80 inches? There are 222,672 bluefin, plus or minus 6,470. It gives you a physical number. Is it going to be super precise and give you the absolute number? Well, of course, there's going to be some wiggle room in that. But one of the cool things about it is it uses genetics and basically the mapping, the lineage mapping of the Western bluefin population as a means to get a population estimate. This is very cool. It's cutting edge. It's very cool. They did this for southern bluefin tuna, and the numbers of southern bluefin tuna were way higher in the close kin than they were in the standard assessment. And that created a whole nother set of challenges to try to integrate the two. But it's also been done for freshwater populations too. I believe it's been applied to things like brook trout in mountain, like Appalachian mountain areas and things like that. So it's a really cool technique. And it's somewhere where, for example, the recreational industry can help us because, again, every fish has a genetic fingerprint, and you can start to match them up. So what we call an absolute population abundance estimate is the most unique part of that. We'll actually get a physical number from that. Second, the genetics can also help, or we're in the pilot stage of using the genetics to identify stock structure. If you remember otolith chemistry, I talked about that, right? So genetics is another way to do that. There are folks, not me, I'm not a geneticist, but there are folks that are working on trying to identify parts of the genetic code that perhaps are unique to each of the stocks, the eastern and the western stock. And then, of course, maybe there's a slope C component, we don't know. But identify stock structure based on just genetics. And then another exciting thing that's done, the sort of the third component of this that's done, which is more prominent for southern bluefin. It's could we do it here in the States? Potentially, but we're in the very, very early days, is to use the genetics as a means to establish abundance indices. In other words, for like juveniles, for example. So instead of observers or intercept surveys or things like that, you actually would get an abundance index for those juveniles off of the DNA, off the genetics. Another really, really, very cool thing. The other exciting part about the genetics project is we will be able to begin identifying individual fish that are more productive than other individual fish are. We can look at that by age and so forth. For the longest time, it's always been thought the older females are more experienced, they lay more eggs, they lay better quality eggs. And I'm to some degree, I'm simplifying this, but the concept is that the older females are better and they all contribute, a lot more. But it might just be that even within those older fish, there are only certain females that are good at what they do, right? And produce, very productive young. Maybe they spawn in particular areas that others don't. And because of where they spawn, their offspring are more successful and they survive. So that genetics project is really exciting. And that is really the crux of the sampling program. That is the crux. There is so much to learn about bluefin through their DNA, their productivity, their mortality, their contributions by sex and so forth.
That's
so
where those fin clips.
That's where those fin clips come in. But to get to your question about the sort of the collective whole of research, we're trying to work with, well, not me personally, but ICAT is trying to get this off the ground in the East as well. And if that happens, that would be pretty amazing because you'd have all of these countries all collecting fish at the exact same time, and you'd have this like massive 23andMe Bluefin program, or Ancestry.com Bluefin program.
And ultimately, it's all working towards the end goal. There's several goals, but the end goal of getting a real representation of how many fish are there and in what age groups, and following those trends so that you can manage the stock proactively instead of reactively.
The challenge and I say I'm not a manager, thankfully. I don't have to have that responsibility. But the challenge I think that the assessment and management community is always up against is that there are high levels of uncertainty with these things, right? The famous quote that I know of is counting fish is like counting trees, except they're invisible, they move around, and they eat each other. So if I'm a forester, and this is not to knock foresters have a hard job. I have friends who are foresters. But if I'm a forester and I have to go out and I'm going to timber cruise a lot, you own 100 acres and I want to timber cruise the 100 acres, I can tell you how many board feet of pine you've got, how many board feet of beech, oak. I can tell you what grade it is. I can do all of that. As a fisheries manager or stock assessment scientist, you're asking me to give you a number of an animal that I can't see, right? And the Atlantic is the second biggest ocean, so it's a daunting task. And so like you said, these are mechanisms by which we chip away at the uncertainty. And what does that chipping away of uncertainty do? It perhaps and hopefully does provide those extra opportunities. And here's one of the biggest challenges of all time, I think, and one of the things that sort of juxtaposes or has historically juxtaposed different groups. You go out and I go out and we observe, acres of bluefin or, miles of bluefin. What we need to be able to do is quantify that. Yes, it's an observation, and I'm not downplaying your observation. I know there's a lot of tuna because we're sampling them and we can barely keep up sometimes. That's how many tuna are coming in. But we need a way to quantify that, and this genetics program, I think, is a way that we might be able to. And again, as you just stated, it's just another chip away at that variability, and you get rid of that, and then we get a better number. We get a better number in terms of what the stock status is, and then what the allocations could be. I will say, and this gets back to your point before, I forgot to mention this, but it is important. I will say that the contributions of the industry, and again, industry is inclusive, it's rec, it's commercial, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of the folks that are at ICAT, was sufficient enough to warrant an increase. I mean, we're the benefactors of an increase in quota over the last couple of years, and we should have that increase through next year. Our U.S. quota now is 1,341 metric tons. That's divided up amongst the user groups, but it's an increase, and it's been kind of just slowly increasing. Is it going to increase forever? No. I mean, that's the way fisheries work. They go up and they go down, and we try to react, or hopefully reactive, we're proactive, but sometimes we're reactive because we have to react to a decline. But I can't stress the importance of all of those samples and the contributions that folks across the Atlantic made, because the eastern stock is also in a better position. It's considered to be in a much better position. A lot of variability in the eastern stock, but we'll leave it at that. But their quota is going up and our quota has gone up. They don't go up equally. Theirs going up by a lot more than ours is. But I would say that I at least view this as positive. And again, doesn't mean it's going to go up in perpetuity. It might need to come down at some point. But all that information is just, it's icing on the cake. Every single fish is just another little bit of information that we can.
It's incredible to think how much can be learned and how much can be gained from just taking the fin clip off a fish. I'm definitely going to make sure we get at least a couple kits for the On the Water office every time we go out. We're going to start contributing to that study, and hopefully a lot of our listeners and readers
I want to get some of the cloth tags.
will get involved as well.
ICAT as well.
And the thing that I would stress is that I would really stress here is. And this program, we call this program, and I'll send you the flyer which you can distribute in post. We call it Genetics for Giants and Juvies, because the idea behind it is that you want to sample everything, big stuff and small stuff. But as with most science projects, especially things that involve something that is so mobile and can move around so much, the only way that we get it done is, and I hate to say this, but we kind of have to put a lot of the onus on the industry, because there's only one of me. Yeah. There's only one of my lab managers, right? I mean, my lab in the summer is pretty big. We're like 14 or 15 people. But a lot of that is dedicated to just simply sampling the fishery. There's 26,000 HMS permits that are issued from Maine to Texas everywhere. From Maine to Texas in any given year. We can't be on those boats. So it's projects like these where, unfortunately, we have to say to the industry, hey, do you mind, can you take a couple extra seconds
help us out a little
and
bit?
help us? Well, really, yeah,
help us help you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And look, I grew up in a fishing family. I've fished a lot on HMS boats. I know sometimes all 6, 7, 8, 10 rods go off at once. It's a mess. It's a nightmare. There's tangles. There's frustration.
Yeah, I hate when that happens.
But you know what? Even if in that case you get one fish out of 6, it's still awesome. It's still awesome. So I would really encourage folks that want to be interested. And then the last thing I would say on the genetics part is we are working now. I would say it's a little bit of work. So I don't want to push it too far. But I hope that by the end of this year, we're going to launch an interactive website. It'll be through UMaine, and the genetics component is one of many interactive things on there. So there'll be a database, and you'll be able to toggle or search and say, okay, where did that larva come from? And it'll point you to where that fish in New England was caught, who it went through. We don't tend to get into the individual level because it's just like a privacy thing, but you'll still be able to see kind of who's related to who, when the fish, when did the fish spawn that larva and when was that adult recaptured. Sometimes they spawn a larva and they're recaptured, a couple, 3 years later.
Will you be able to see it for your fish? Like specifically?
As long you can, yes, you can. As long as we always ask people, are they okay for that? With that? If they're okay with that, then it's good. Then we're good. We just don't ever share anything with anybody under an assumption that they feel that it should be known by everybody. But absolutely, if you're interested in it, absolutely, we keep track of everybody's fish. So if you mail us back a box of vials, we know that those vials were assigned to you. That's why it's important to fill out that online form. It's really simple. It's not like, this isn't like doing your taxes or something. This is really easy. It's like name, address, and so forth. That way, when it comes full circle, we can get in touch with you and you can say, hey, that fish you caught the other day, or that fish you caught in 2022 on the Regal Sword? Guess what? Someone just caught the dad in
That
Canada.
is incredible.
In Canada. Someone just caught the dad in Nova Scotia, right? That type of a thing. That's the really interesting and, in my opinion, fascinating part of it. It's about engagement too, right? I mean, people people want to be engaged. And that's the other thing with this website and some of our social media stuff that we do as well. We are all about sharing and wanting folks to see what the fruits of their labor are. That doesn't necessarily mean that because you sampled, you're going to get a match. I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of fish in the ocean. You might sample 100 or 1,000. You may never see a match. You might sample 5 and you get 4 matches. That's just the way that it goes. It's just probability sometimes.
How far-reaching is this science? Is it applicable to all finfish? And
So there are other active projects going on right now. I don't
want to get too far.
No, absolutely. And there's other projects. So I'm sure your listeners and your viewership don't all fish for tuna, right? I like to think of bluefin as the center of the universe, but they're not. There are other interests that people have, whether they're sea bass or groundfish or what have you. There are other programs that are going on as well. I think the Department of Marine Fisheries, Jeff actually might have something ongoing with getting cod finlets and things like that. So yes, there are other programs that are doing this.
That's
as
great.
well.
Think of all the times you've released a small fish and been like, all right, I want to catch your dad now. You could actually maybe know that you did that.
Yeah, you can know that you did it, which is kind of cool.
That's actually pretty funny. The probability of that ever happening
Is really
has gotta
low. It's really low.
Insane.
No, I was just going to say, I was just going to say that with the increase in the resource, and I don't know if it's something that you want to touch on, I don't want to preempt anything, but with the increase in the resource, we do have more fish that are being landed. In the recreational sector, again, that's a personal consumption thing, right? You can't sell those small fish. But in the big fish fishery, we have a lot of entrants now, more entrants, I think, than we have in the past. And we also have more fish now. So many more
what
fish.
What problems does that create?
So just recently this year, the National Marine Fisheries Service through NOAA implemented their new, what we call restricted fishing days. So I'll give you a short timeline of kind of how this has evolved, and it's been awesome to be part of it.
Family owned and operated for over 65 years, AFCO represents unparalleled quality, performance, and reliability when it counts most. From inventing the roller guide to introducing the world's first pair of true fishing shorts, which are some of the most comfortable shorts you'll ever own, by the way. AFCO not only delivers products proven to perform on the water, but are true leaders of conservation as well. Their pledge to protect and conserve has 10% of your AFCO purchases going directly to supporting conservation initiatives. Beyond their fishing shorts, a couple of my personal favorites are the Barricade Elite bibs and jacket, as well as their line of Reaper sweatshirts, pullovers, and jackets. Check them out at afco.com. AFCO, any fish, any water.
So back in the 2000s, I remember 2005, 6, and 7, I think, were the years where there was scarce a giant bluefin to be found. We might have landed like 30% of our quota or something crazy like that for the big fish. And then the fishery was not only opened up from June 1 through March 31st, but the retention limits were very liberal. In some years, they allowed the commercial fishermen to keep 5 fish on a trip. Very liberal. And then all of a sudden, in the 2010s, you began to see a little bit of an uptick, and the retention limits were brought down from 5 to 4. I don't remember the exact sequence, but then we got to 1 fish a day. Then the 1 fish a day was too many. Too many fish coming in. You're closing the quotas too quickly. So then they went to restricted fishing days. This means that if you're a commercial fisherman, there are certain days of the week that you're not allowed to catch and sell your product. Last few years, it was 3 days out of the year. This year, it's now 4. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday. So there are 4 days a week now that you're not allowed to land bluefin from July 1st.
July 1st, right.
Exactly, from July 1st. In June, you're good. You're good in June. From July 1st to November 30th is, I believe, the cutoff date now. What has this done? Contrary to maybe some of the information that you would read online that may say that bluefin is scarce or bluefin is endangered, they are not. They have been removed pretty much from every list you can imagine. We have lots of bluefin around. And the travesty in my mind is that a lot of those fish, not a lot, let me back that up, not a lot, it's a bad qualifier. Some of those fish are difficult to move. And they're difficult to move because of several reasons. Information, fear of eating a bluefin maybe is one of those. It's complicated, is one of those. Having a lot of those fish come in at one time is another. You know, if you get 150 bluefin on a single day, that creates a challenge. How are you going to move the product?
They don't freeze well.
No, it's a fresh fish market. You have to have a fresh fish, and you have to send it somewhere. We also have issues with folks being able to handle it. You own a restaurant.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to buy an 800-pound tuna? Are you
how
out
am I
of your
gonna do with
mind?
that? Yeah.
How am I going to lift it? Where am I going to store it? Who's going to cut it? I don't even have a knife.
Yeah.
So there's the restaurant end of things. There's the marketability. Again, bluefin is often viewed by many to be a red listed animal. You don't want to eat it. So it's created a lot of challenges. It's depressed prices, right? The prices are nowhere near what they used to be. If you look at the averages, I don't want to quote the exact numbers, but I want to say I think I'm safe if I say the average price of bluefin over the last 5 or 6 years has hovered between $5 and $9. I think I would capture 95% of the fish that were landed. I think I'd be pretty close. So, and then you have a lot of fish that will get less than that. You know, sometimes it's, you know, $1, or maybe it's less, or maybe the fish doesn't even sell if you ship a consignment or something like that. So there's been a whole lot of challenges related to that. And one of the things that we are working on there's a couple of things we're working on with folks in terms of marketability is really getting the word out on several fronts. One, it's okay to eat bluefin, okay? For right now, it's okay to eat bluefin. 20 years ago is 20 years ago.
Sure.
Okay? Things change. Things change. Populations, as I said, they go up, they go down. Right now, we're in an up. And there's no reason not to utilize the resource. It's caught right here. It's right off of you aren't going to get a fresher fish
That's always
than that.
blown my mind that
You're not gonna
most
get
of
a-
it goes
Yeah.
way away from where
You're not going to get a fresher fish than that. Okay, it's right here. The other problem that we run into is that our export market is flipped on its head now. Most of the bluefin that we catch domestically stay in the country. They don't get exported overseas, which is, again, contrary to what a lot of people think. They're like, these fish are going to Japan and they're getting $80 a pound. No, they're not. A lot of them are staying domestic. So domestically, we need to absorb that extra supply. So we do a lot of stuff with marketability. We have a project with GMRI specifically. We were at the Boston Seafood Show. I actually got a U.S. bluefin. I sourced a U.S. bluefin, and we had it at the show. Miraculously, it was a diamond of a fish. It was awesome. Had crazy fat in it. And people came up and loved it. They had a private showing for some of the larger wholesalers in the U.S., so we're working on that avenue. Yep. I'm working with some other groups, GMRI and some other groups independently, to try to get some certifications, actually, for bluefin that are independent of some of the larger certification programs, again, as a way to reassure people, eat this fish.
Yeah.
Eat this fish. You do a lot of things. Number one, you avoid the resource being wasted. You support our U.S. boats. Why not support a guy that's in Gloucester or Portland, Maine, or Newport, Rhode Island, or wherever they're out of, but why not support that boat? As opposed to, again, nothing against another country's boats, but if I have a choice, I'm going to support this boat, over another boat. So we've been doing a lot of marketing with folks, education, surveying a lot of restaurants. Okay, you own a restaurant. What is it that prohibits you from carrying a bluefin? Is it the size? Is it this? Is it that? And then from there, we can break it down. Okay, if it is a size thing, well, now maybe we got to think about loining those products, which some of the distributors are actually doing. Maybe there is a blast freezing option. It doesn't freeze well in a freezer, but if you have a blast freezer, it will freeze. Now, there are specific techniques for freezing and thawing it to make sure that it doesn't jeopardize the quality of the product. But again, this is just a learning game where we understand how we might be able to utilize the resource, better. So we've been working on a lot of different fronts, and we're very lucky. We have a lot of fish around.
We're working hard to create a more robust domestic market.
Yeah, I think we need to. You need to create that. And another thing that I would stress for folks is that if you've never had a bluefin, they are unbelievable. They can be plated in several different ways. I'm not a chef, so maybe I'm speaking outside of my expertise.
What's your favorite way to eat a bluefin?
Raw.
Yeah.
Just cut it raw. I love it. I love it plated as sashimi. But having it other ways is really good too.
I can't wait for my first poke bowl.
So, yeah, poke bowls are great. Even grilling the steaks is fantastic. But that's the other part of this too is, and we have some initiatives with like tournaments up in Maine where we have like a Bluefin week. We want the local restaurants to promote Bluefin. So if you're at all interested, get in touch with these dealers, buy these fish. They're coming into this port. It's right here. Your restaurants ring this port. It's the summer season. Get people involved. Bring them in. Have them eat a piece of Bluefin. And try to expose people more and get, people coming back to, to enjoy the resource. Because it's just a shame to not utilize something that we have so close, to our shore.
That's some good stuff. I mean, we may have covered this, so just tell
go
me
ahead.
to shut up and move on.
No.
What is looking out ahead, what's the most pressing management issues facing bluefin tuna?
Probably the mixing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quantifying the mixing and understanding. I would say because, so the quotas in the East are going to go up dramatically. And my fear, and this is just mine, this is me speaking completely on my own opinion, given that we know the mixing, the Eastern subsidies or the contributions from the Eastern stock are so high, my fear is that if those Eastern fish get hit really hard, it then impacts the flow of fish to our fisheries.
Yep.
Maybe I'll be proved wrong, or maybe the evidence will show that I'm wrong. But I think the most pressing issue is trying to balance. I think the most pressing issue is trying to balance out the increase in those stocks against the appropriate removals. Again, with the information we have now, and balancing that uncertainty within those goalposts. I think that's really challenging. And again, what happens on one stock, especially the Eastern stock, impacts us here in the West. And that's for everybody, by the way. As I said, that's not just for the giants. That's also for the recreational category. It's for both. So I think that, and then again, I would get into the stock composition and mixing dynamics around like the Slope C area and so forth, because there's so much we don't know about that area.
The last thing, science has done work investigating the influence of like offshore oil platforms in relation to the health and movement of yellowfin. Is that same objective playing out in real time with all this wind farm, construction?
So as you know, the roadmap for offshore wind is pretty intense. The wind farm leases that I'm aware of, and again, I'm not in BOEM, but as far as I know, those wind leases are going to stretch from the Gulf of Maine all the way down past the Carolinas. I don't know about Georgia and eastern Florida. I'm not sure about that, but certainly they also have plans for inside the Gulf of Mexico as well. Along the East Coast, Gulf of Maine, southern New England, you already have some of those that are in place under construction. So southern New England, for example. I have colleagues that are working in those regions right now. They're actually tagging HMS species and trying to understand, is there going to be an impact here or is there not? We, Matt Davis and I, are doing the HMS tagging in the Gulf of Maine right now. So we've been doing tunas and what I would call our seasonal sharks and maybe local, you want to call poor beagles. But we're tagging bluefins and then any of the shark species that we can as a way to identify. For us, we're lucky. We're ahead of the game. So we're identifying like pre-construction, during construction, post-construction. We're ahead of the game. Yeah. Folks in southern New England, I don't know if they had that luxury. I think they were a little bit more under the gun in the sense that the projects were going to start a lot sooner. Gulf of Maine wind, probably you're a decade out. So we've got a long time. Southern New England, I don't know if the timing matched up as well. So it was a little bit harder there. I do get the question asked a lot, how is this going to impact HMS? Mixed bag.
Does anybody know?
Nobody knows. I mean, obviously you could say this. You could point to the Gulf of Mexico and you could say, all right, well, those thousands of rigs, every one of those is a fad. And they do aggregate fish. But the question becomes...
At what cost?
Well, there's a cost associated with it. Yep, there's a cost. And, again, that can, everybody's kind of got their opinion about what that cost is, environmental, social, etc. My opinion is more on the biological end of things and wondering, will a bluefin use it? and I don't know if they will. It's a different species. It has different vertical behaviors. It has different horizontal behaviors. I don't know, if the turbines hold bait, if they are themselves a fad, would they stay there? I don't know. I think the jury's open on that. I think it's definitely open on that, what the impact is going to be. I can tell you that we have both electronic data, mini-pat, pop-up satellite archival tag data, my lab personally, I'm sure the other labs have it too, but we have tag data. Matt Davis and I at Maine DMR, we have acoustic tag data, and I've been putting together, graciously through the contributions of the commercial fishery, a fishery-dependent database that looks at where giant bluefin have traditionally either been observed or landed from the commercial boats. And I can tell you that in all three of those cases, they all show overlap.
Yeah.
They all show overlap. So whether you're looking at the distribution of the commercial landings, whether you're looking at the electronic mini-pat daily geolocation estimates, which have a lot of error to them, but whether you look at that or you're looking at the acoustic tags that Matt is leading on that project, they all show use of those areas. So the question's going to become, does it change? I think we'll have a lot of baseline data to look at to see if those changes are in effect. But again, they build them and then it does have an effect. Well, what do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if they're going to rip them down. So I don't know I don't know what'll happen there. That's a sort of that's
the
more
last connection to that whole thing. You had said in that presentation that Kevin and I first heard that there's a lot of larval studies and toads that happen in the canyons and stuff. Like, does the stage of those fish come inshore with certain conditions that could, the way that these farms operate, where they're taking in water, treating it, and spitting it back out, does that have potential, or to the larval stage bluefin tuna, is that a threat to them?
So I think I have this correct. The area in the Slope Sea and the larval distributions that I've seen to date suggest, and again, maybe I'm speaking out of line, but I think I've got this, suggest that the larvae that are identified in that Slope Sea area are quite a ways offshore. Very unlikely, given the currents, they're going to get drawn into where the wind farms are. Very, very unlikely. That's just my opinion. I don't know. Of course, the Gulf Stream meanders, and you get the eddies.
Yep.
Could they get entrained in an eddy and come inshore? Well, I mean, it's anybody's guess. But in my opinion, I feel like there's going to be quite a distance there. It's not to say that they can't get advected over that direction, but I think with the way that the currents are going, they probably are going to end up more on a stream-oriented, direction. But here's another idea for your listeners and your viewers. I've been talking with the folks at the Southeast Center and about ways to sample in the Slope Sea. There are a couple ways to sample larvae out there. One is you get a big ship, like a big NOAA ship or a big academic ship. A lot of money, good at what they do, a lot of money. Okay, and you dedicate a month or two to doing that. And the Slope Sea, the timing is a little different. The timing in the Slope Sea is like end of June, July for spawning, whereas in the Gulf of Mexico, it's earlier in the spring, end of winter. The alternative to that is, if we have guys that are going out to the canyons, June, July, August, there are these things called light traps that you can deploy. Like if the guys are doing an overnight, you can deploy these light traps, and they are exactly what they say they are. They're light traps. They catch larvae. And so and again, even though a lot of times where the guys are fishing in the canyons is still quite a ways from where the Slope Sea larvae have been found, it's possible that you get some advection, and you might have some individuals that get entrained and they come off. Or who knows, maybe the conditions are different and the bluefin spawn closer to shore. That is another possibility where if you're going out to those canyons, and you might be going after yellowfins and big eyes or white marlins or whatever, but you can take that trap, drop it over the side, and it does its own thing. It collects the larva all by itself. It has to sit there.
How big is it?
It's not very big. I think it's like just a small
Small
box.
in a milk crate?
Yeah,
Cool.
Yep, you can kind of, I think you can probably just throw it over the side. And they've been pretty successful to date too. So that's something else to think about in the future.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's something to think about. But I think, the offshore wind that's on everybody's mind. And I don't think the scientific community has an idea yet how it's gonna unfold. I mean, it's big. It's not like, a little thing. These are really big structures. And there's all sorts of questions to answer about, use within the research or within the arrays and things like that are even outside of science. It's more of a social question, right? How can you use them and when? But I mean, if they were fads, that would be great, I guess, right? Yeah. It'd aggregate them. You'd know where to go. I don't know.
The awesome thing is there's a lot of bluefin around.
There are.
I love bluefin. You obviously love
Yes.
bluefin. So that's awesome. Awesome
Yeah.
stuff to be living it in this stretch. Kevin, you got anything else?
No, I really appreciate you coming in and having this
Absolutely. Happy
conversation
to.
with us. We'll do our best to share all the information that you put out there. We'll do our best to put a post on our website and let people know how they can get involved. I definitely want to get involved, and I'm excited to see what all this science tells us going forward.
Yeah.
That sounds great. I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity. I always tell people, so I wear a lot of hats in academia, right? One hat is I have to teach, which I love. I love to teach. I love students, and I love sharing what we do in our lab. The second is the research part. So I'm supposed to run what we call an extramurally funded research program, like we talked about with all the science that we just discussed. And then the third part is what's called service. So one example of that is I chair the US ICAT Advisory Committee, so that's a service requirement that I do. Not a requirement, that's a service that I do every year, as well as I'm on some domestic fisheries panels and things like that. But I will say that the most enjoyable part of my job and the thing that I get the most out of are these types of events, whether they're a smaller scale interview or if I'm doing, offshore fishing seminar series and there's 500 people in the room. I think the most important part about all of this is that if you are engaging the industry in the science, you'd better give back to that industry who donated their time. And for us, it's all about these types of things, sharing the results, sharing tag data, sharing the genetics data. That's what it's all about. It's really about, everybody having an idea of what's going on and why are you doing it. I mean, if I'm going to ask you to save the bluefin heads or sample the heads, it's going to take you a couple minutes, right, to do it. In my opinion, it's nice for you to have something back. So that's I love this. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and it was an awesome conversation. And just inform everybody that if they ever have questions or comments or anything they want to talk about, I'm happy to, and we'll provide all the details on how to become involved.
Love it.
Oh,
Go
thank
from
you
there.
so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
You're
Walt.
welcome.